And welcome, everybody, to another Mark Bishop Show. You know, throughout the country, we've seen anti-voter legislation, political violence, and targeted misinformation. All of this is meant to create deliberate barriers to participating in our electoral process. The Leadership Conference wants to empower people, especially young people of color, to be the change they want to see in the system. Because we know that for our democracy to work, for all of us, it must include us all. Bree Spencer is the Senior Program Director of Justice Reform, and she's going to explain the connection between mass incarceration and disenfranchisement and why ending mass criminalization and incarceration in the United States is an urgent civil rights issue. And YT Bell, my other guest, Senior Director of ASIV, and that is And Still I Vote. And without further ado, the both of them. She is the Senior Program Director of Justice Reform. Welcome to you both, ladies.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Inequalities plague the U.S. criminal legal system. Why is that, YT Bell? Let me ask you.
Well, so as it relates to the criminalization of the legal system and why that impacts individuals of color, it's been systemic racism that is the root of that. But my colleague Bree leads that work in justice reform, so I defer to her.
Okay.
Yeah, our entire criminal legal system from the beginning was built specifically to target Black people. Like the history of policing in America, for example, is rooted in slave catching. And so there's, at its foundation, there are problems in the way we've approached the concept of policing the United States. And that same racist issue kind of trails through the entire system today. And one of the ways we can change it is by having a really involved constituency of folks in the public who are pushing constantly for the change they want to see. The best way to do that is to try to change things where you live. And the best way to do that is to make sure you're participating. Democracy is not a spectator sport, right? So getting involved in local boards, getting involved with local organizations who are advancing issues that you want to see changed. But also, and the key in what we're about right now is talking about voting and the importance of showing up to the ballot box, voting the entire ballot, down ballot, not just the top level things, like not just for president, but for all the local elections as well. And we know because of the work and the way policies flow, which is one of the things Leadership Conference focuses on, is that every time you go to the ballot box, justice is on the ballot.
Okay, well, I'll encourage either of you to come forward if the question pertains to you. So can you tell us more about how voting in local, state, and federal elections can help achieve a new vision of public safety then?
Well, that's a great question, Mark. And so the real reality there is that we should be encouraging individuals to consistently vote, because we know we talk about voting as this is a presidential or if there's a large election. However, every election at every level has an impact on individuals' quality of life. And people should think about voting as the tool to change that, because they're essentially electing individuals that have the same ideals that they have. And so they actually have the power of the vote in order to change the trajectory of their lives. And so, when we think about elections and the impact, it has an impact on everybody, whether you care about healthcare or education or justice reform. All of those are intersected. And the only way we can create the change in our communities is by showing up to the ballot box. But it definitely has a direct impact on justice. My colleague Bree leads a lot of that work in the Vision for Justice campaign that she leads. But a lot of it is centered around being able to wield power and also change the conditions and the constructs, as Bree mentioned earlier, that are impacting communities of color specifically and have been for centuries. And a lot of those policymakers are on the ballot that have the ability to allocate funds to these institutions, but also change them. And so I'll defer to my colleague Bree, who can explain more around justice being on the ballot from the federal election to the state and then into the local.
Okay, so can you tell us more about how voting in the local, state, and federal elections, the 18 to 35 years old now, and all year to sustain their engagement, why is it so critical to engage these people?
Yeah, so Mark, they're critical constituents. When we think about 2024, it's very clear looking at the data and the demographic data as we review around the country, individuals 18 to 35 will make up the majority. So they are a critical electorate that needs to be spoken to, talked to in a way of the promises of our democracy and how they're able to wield the power that they already hold in order to change it to look like the things that they care about, whether it's justice reform or healthcare or education or reproductive healthcare. And so when we think about the new American majority, it consists of, quite frankly, young people, individuals 18 to 35, which a lot of them have seen a lot of things, whether it was the pandemic or most in during the pandemic saw some of the uprising due to the murders that they saw around the country as it relates to the need for justice reform. And so it's critical that, we target and focus on young people and figuring out what is it that they want out of their democracy and telling them that they have the tool, which is the vote. Now, the real reality is we know that they're disillusioned, right, with the fact that our government hasn't delivered on the issues that they care about, but they hold the power. So through the And Still I Vote campaign, that's what we're doing. We're empowering them to use the power that they already have by taking the action and going to the ballot box and not just voting for the top of the ticket, but down the ballot. Because we've heard from young individuals that want better roles, they want better jobs. Well, a lot of those things don't come from the president directly, but they come from the state legislature and also the local elected officials in their city that can increase, the types of jobs and the types of industries that come to the cities that they reside in. And so we are definitely focusing on the new American majority, and as the majority, constantly letting them know that they hold the power in order to change the outcome for our future.
Okay, and Bree, may I ask you, what does the Leadership Conference see as the priorities for change in the U.S. criminal legal system?
Absolutely. So first, I just want to put a plug in for our Vision for Justice policy platform. It can be found at visionforjustice.org. And it gives a myriad of different ways across the entire criminal legal spectrum that like leverage points where policy could change that would make a difference.
Yes, that's the V4J that I was going to ask you about. What is the objective of Vision for Justice?
Yeah, it's really to provide an in-depth policy language platform for folks at the local, state, and federal levels who want to see change in criminal legal system policy, but don't necessarily always have the language or know exactly, okay, we want to change policing. How do we do that? It lays out how to get it done for policing, pretrial reform, how to fight back against the destructive war on drugs, and all these different, even reentry, how it works for people when they're released from incarceration, they've served their time, and problems that they encounter along the way, how to fix those. And so we have a very comprehensive platform in Vision for Justice, but I do want to answer, I think, the heart of your question, which is what are the top line priorities for changing the criminal legal system right now according to the Leadership Conference? And I will say there are three things I want to share. One is passing transformative police accountability legislation. Right now, there is an absolute vacuum where there should be data and information and accountability and evaluation of the effectiveness of policing and how to improve it. We also really need to end felony disenfranchisement. When people commit a crime, they go to jail or prison, and they get out, we need to restore the vote to those folks. There are a huge number, hundreds of thousands of people who aren't allowed to vote and aren't allowed to participate in democracy, even though they're paying taxes, they're engaged, they're working, they're out in the community, so they need to be represented. And then finally, I just want to lift up the need for alternative or community-based first response. I'm referring to non-armed first response because criminalization is not always the appropriate tool. I would argue often not the appropriate tool, but there are certainly circumstances where someone's in a mental health crisis or they're struggling with a substance abuse disorder, and criminalizing them does nothing to improve the situation for anyone and often increases harms in the long run. So we want to see more and more programs and financial support for programs around the country to stand up community-based first response.
All right, folks, now for more information on that, and you can read a lot more, go to visionforjustice.org. That's visionforjustice.org. And from your point of view, YT, what about a website for ASIV and Still I Vote?
Yeah. So Mark, it's ANDSTILLIVOTE.org. And so, as I've mentioned throughout this interview, and Still I Vote is a campaign through the Leadership Conference Education Fund that recognizes the power that we hold as the majority. And we're strategically focusing on engaging, persuading, and mobilizing individuals 18 to 35 to show up for their communities by wielding their powers down the ballot in these upcoming elections. Because if we want to see the change for our future, as well as hold on to the rights that we have to continuously and consistently show up in all elections, but definitely in the upcoming elections.
Right. Thank you, YT. YT Bell, ladies and gentlemen. She's the Senior Director of And Still I Vote, ASIV. And Bree Spencer, the Senior Program Director of Justice Reform. Have a great day to both of you.
You too, Mark.
Thank you. You too.